Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel Amir Hashem. Today, we will be learning Daf Kuf Pei Daled Amud Aleph. We begin a brand new Siman today, Siman Shin Lamed Ches, the bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch on Kuf Pei Gimel Amid Beis. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Kabeis Yisrael Hanasunim Batzara Bashivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayom Bein Be'avasha Hamakrim Yerachem Aleihem V'Yotziam Yitzar L'Rvacha Me'afel L'Oira Mishibur L'Geula Hashta Bagolo V'Zman Kariv and Emar Amein. Our learning should be a schus refuah shalema for Esther Fradel Bas Chana Meshemer Ben Esther Fradel Yitzchak Ben Zion Ben Dusha Rivka Bashir Aleich Havadasa Baserel Yeshua Levi Ben Ahuva Malka Chana, and for Gila Shifra Bas Ilan Udal. They should all have a refuah shalema b'Seich Shar Chole Yisrael. And as always, we are mispal that b'schus the limud HaTorah of Klal Yisrael, the Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua's refuahs Parnas and Shidduchim to all those in need, and the Rebbeinu Shalom has to usually where I close this year, and the Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over every member of Klal Yisrael b'chol makom shehem. Okay, Siman Shin Lamed Ches, Devarim ha'asurim b'Shabbos mishum hashmas koil, things that are forbidden, prohibited on Shabbos because of an issue of hashmas koil, an issue of generating sound, literally. Ubay ches seifim, and here we have 8 seifim. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, hashmas koil b'klei shir aser. You're not allowed to make sound with musical instruments. So the Gemara in Eruvin Daf Kuf Daled Amud Aleph, the Gemara tells us you're not allowed to play a musical instrument on Shabbos. So you can't play a guitar on Shabbos. You can't play a piano on Shabbos. You can't play a trumpet on Shabbos. You can't play musical instruments on Shabbos. Why is that? It's because of Gzeira Shemiyasakin Klei Shir. We're afraid that if you're going to come to use musical instruments, you might come to repair them. You might come to assemble them. You might come to tune them. I think one of the issues over here is that musical instruments, the use of musical instruments, typically involves being misakin klei shir. When a person picks up a guitar to play a guitar, they always tell you, you pick up a guitar, the first thing you do is you tune the guitar. Every time you pick up a guitar, you haven't played it in a day, the first thing you do when you pick up the guitar is you tune the guitar. That would be misakin klei shir. That would be a problem of makeh b'patish, tikkun maneh. So you can't be misakin a klei shir. You start playing the piano, something doesn't sound right. You go, you tune it. So unlike a lot of other kelim that you use, we don't find that you're not allowed to use kelim because we have exerted that anytime you use a kelim, you might come to repair it. We don't find such a thing. But by klei shir, we find this gzeira, shemi yasakin klei shir. So you're not allowed to play musical instruments, issa d'Rabbanan, because of gzeira that you're going to come to makeh b'patish, a gzeira shemi yasakin klei shir. Now let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is cut in Aleph. Says the Mishnah Berurah klei shir. First of all, points out the Mishnah Berurah something very important right away. We just spoke about playing musical instruments. But how about if you're generating musical sound not with a musical instrument? Says the Mishnah Berurah, lav dafka b'klei shir. The problem over here is not isolated to using actual musical instruments. Ela af biyad. Even if you create musical sound using your hands. Kigoin, for example, lahakos kaf al kaf, to clap, heichashu derech simcha v'shir. To clap to a beat. Or even not to clap to a beat, just to clap derech simcha v'shir. Clapping is a problem. Your hands certainly aren't musical instruments, and we're certainly not afraid gzeri yishemi yasakin klei shir because you're going to repair your hands. But we are afraid that once you get involved in derech simcha v'shir, you might come to be masakin klei shir. So again, says the Mishnah Berurah, and this is important rule number 1. The Mechaber tells us you're not allowed to play a musical instrument. Comes along the Mishnah Berurah, he extends this not just to musical instruments, but even to something like clapping. Lav dafka b'klei shir, elaf biyad, kigan lahakis kaf al kaf, heichashu derech simcha v'shir, aser. And by the way, people should realize that this also extends to people are sitting and singing Zmiris on Shabbos, and they start drumming to the beat on the table. Not allowed to do it. Not allowed to do it. It's the same exact problem. You're using your hand to be mashmiya koil. You're using your hands to generate a musical beat. You're doing it in a musical way. It's derech simcha v'shir, and that is aser for the very same gzeira. Gzeira shemi yisaki klei shir. Also, Kamasha Kasav is Siman Shin Lamed Tesiv Gimel Mitam Shemi Yisaki Klei Shir. We're going to see this beferish in Siman Shin Lamed Tes. So that's the first thing that the Mishnah Berurah tells us over here that you should know. The Mechaber says that you're not allowed to play a musical instrument because Gzeira Shemi Yisaki Klei Shir. Says the Mishnah Berurah it's not isolated to playing musical instruments. You're not allowed to generate musical sound, or you're not allowed to generate sound using your hands. If it's also derech simcha v'shir, same gzeira, you're not allowed to do it. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, Umada asru b'sif dalid lahakos kaf al kaf. It's sif dalid. In this siman, we're going to learn that you're not allowed to clap kishameshamer aperos when you're out in the field and you're protecting the crops. You're not allowed to clap kidei lahafriach ha'oifos. So you're out in the field and you're protecting the cucumbers, and the birds start to come, and you go like this to scare the birds. Now that's not derech simcha v'shir. So if the problem with clapping is gzeira shemi yisaki klei shir, it seems wholly inappropriate to make a gzeira shemi yisaki klei shir when you're clapping to make a startling noise to scare away the birds. Explains the Mishnah Berurah, over there is a different problem. This that we answer that, av shehu eino derech shir, even though over there it's not derech shir, ha'asamatam, over there is a different reason. There, the reason for the yisr is shemayita tzrar v'yizrak l'rishos harabim k'shayirtza lahavricha k'demefarisham. The problem with Sif Dalet is not gzeira shemi yisaki klei shir. The problem with Sif Dalet is gzeira of hoitzah. We're afraid that if we're going to allow you to clap to scare away the birds, you might come to pick up a rock to throw a rock at the birds to scare away the birds. Now then, you might come up against hoitzah. You might throw it into Rishos Harabim. You might throw it Dalet Amos in Rishos Harabim. So over here we have a different problem. That's the Isser. By there, that's not Gzeira Shemi Yisaki Klei Shir. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. V'em yirtza lahakos kaf al kaf. Let's say you taka want to clap, and you want to clap in a musical way on Shabbos, but you want to do it kidei l'sameach hatinoik ulahashtikoy. You have a crying baby, and you want to clap a little ditty with your hands in order to calm the baby down. The Mishnah Berurah gives you an eitzah how you could do it. You should do it in an abnormal way. Deshari, which is mutter, in Siman Shin Lamed Tes. So it says, very important rule over here now. Another very important rule from this Mishnah Berurah. You're not allowed to go ahead and clap derech simcha v'shir. But you could clap derech simcha v'shir if you do it klachayad. That's why you see people do this. They turn a hand backwards, and they do this. Now they're clapping klachayad. Says the Mishnah Berurah, we'll see in Siman Shin Lamed Tes, to clap klachayad, to do it with a shinoi, is mutter. Okay. Weiter in this very interesting Mishnah Berurah, says the Mishnah Berurah, V'im noisen mayim bekli mole nekavim. They had some kind of an interesting keli. They had a keli that you could pour water into, and it had a very narrow opening. So you could stop it up by putting your thumb on it. So you have this keli, you fill it up with water. Now this keli was perforated at the bottom. So you would pour water into this keli, the water would drip out. But the water can't drip out unless air could come into the keli, right? In order for water to leave the keli, air has to be able to come in to displace it, otherwise there's a vacuum. So you would pour water into this keli and put your thumb on the opening on top. Now no water could drip out the bottom because no air could get in. When you wanted water to drip out the bottom, you lift up your thumb. Now the water would start to drop out from the bottom of this keli. Now what they would do is, they would take this keli, fill it up with water, put the thumb on top, then position it over a metal keli. And then when they wanted to make noise, they would take their finger off the top, the water would start to drip. Now when you have water going drip, 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 drip on a metal keli, it makes a pleasant sound. Or it could make a pleasant sound. You could even modulate the sound by, putting your thumb on, taking your thumb off. You can make a rhythm, and you can have the water dripping out onto the metal keli and making a very pleasant sound. So this is kind of a primitive musical instrument. And that's exactly what the Mishnah Berurah is going to say. The Mishnah Berurah is going to say you're not allowed to do this on Shabbos because of the same problem, Gzeira Shemi Yisaki Klei Shir. Because essentially what you have over here is a primitive Klei Shir. Says the Mishnah Berurah, let's see it inside. If you put water into this perforated keli, so that you're then going to allow the water to drip into a metal keli, so that it should make a pleasant sound through the drip, 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 drip. Also, this is also. Why? Does it have gam cake clay shear? Because this is considered using clay shear. Using clay shear is also. Clay shear. But now the Mishnah Berurah says something very interesting. Let's say you have an ill individual, and this ill individual needs to sleep, and he's having a hard time sleeping. What you want to do is you want to play this primitive musical instrument in order to create a pleasant sound to lull the chayla to sleep. Says the Mishnah Berurah, ulechayla, to do this for a chayla, kedei lahardima sheyishan, to make him drowsy so that he should sleep, shari, then it would be mutter. Now, very interesting. What the Mishnah Berurah seems to be saying over here is that the Isser D'Rabbanan against playing a musical instrument, Gzeir Shemi Yisaki Klei Shir, we waive it for a chayla. Now, we seem to be talking over here about a chayla she'ein by sakana. If we were talking about a chayla she'yesh by sakana, this would be dead obvious. We're talking about a chayla she'ein by sakana. Now, the psak that we had earlier about a chayla she'ein by sakana is that Yisrael is allowed to perform an Isser D'Rabbanan for a chayla she'ein by sakana if he does it with a shinui. Now, this doesn't seem to be a shinui. The Mishnah Berurah just finished saying you're not allowed to do this on Shabbos because this is, in the words of the Mishnah Berurah, it's aser dezehevi gam kein kikli shir. So he called it a klei shir, and he's saying now that you're allowed to do this for a chayla she'ein by sakana, which is interesting. Now, could be, I'm wondering if when the Mishnah Berurah said aser dezehevi gam kein ke kli shir, it's similar to a kli shir. Maybe the Mishnah Berurah considers this a shinui? Maybe he doesn't consider it mamish a guitar. A guitar would be an out-and-out Isser D'Rabbanan. Are we going to waive that Isser D'Rabbanan for a chayla she'ein by sakana? I don't know that we will. But maybe this keli with the water going drip-drip onto a metal keli, maybe that's not a guitar. Maybe that's considered, it's like a klei shir, but maybe it's like a klei shir with a shinui. But if it was a real shinui, so then l'chayr it would be like clapping klachayad. And l'chayr it should be mutter. Maybe it's in between. Maybe the Mishnah Berurah is like, it's epis shinui, enough that we could be makel, and we could be matter it for a chayla, but it's not klachayad. I'm not sure. Okay. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. V'imatif b'chayzik. But let's say you're allowing the water to drip out with force. Kedei sheyokitz es habari mishnasai, to create an alarm clock. Now you're not making a pleasant sound to lull somebody to sleep. Now you're making an annoying noise to wake somebody up. Shari, that would be mutter. Why? Because then it's not similar to a klei shir. Kevin she'ein oise b'ne'ima u'benachas. The kol kazeh adarabah hayimar dima yoser. Now you're not doing something pleasant. Now you're doing something annoying. If it was pleasant, it wouldn't work as an alarm clock. It would lull him to sleep. Now, I think I just got the answer to what was puzzling me. I didn't notice this when I was preparing shir. I always say there's a special siyata d'shmaya when you say a shir. I find very often that when you're saying the shir, things come to you that didn't come to you beforehand. Let me ask you a question. Are you allowed to play a guitar on Shabbos if you make an annoying sound? If you don't take the guitar and play it properly, but instead you take the guitar and you start banging annoyingly on the strings, or you take a drum set and you don't know how to play the drums, and you just go bang, 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 and you make annoying noise, are you allowed to do that on Shabbos to wake somebody up? I don't think so. You're using klei shir on Shabbos. So why is it that over here you're allowed to do it if it's making an annoying sound? I think the answer is that, like we said, this perforated keli with the water, it's not really a musical instrument. So if you're using it to make pleasant music, then we can't let you do this, because it's kikli shir. If you're doing it for a chayla, we could be makel, because it's not a real musical instrument, it's at least a shinoi. If you're doing it to make annoying noise, then we're going to call it's like clapping that's not derech simcha v'shir, then we'll be matter it. Interesting. Okay. So, let's go back to the Mechaber. So we saw the first phrase of the Mechaber, Hashmaz koil b'kli shir. Also, you're not allowed to play musical instruments on Shabbos Gzeir Shem Yisaka Klishir. We saw the Mishnah Berurah that extends the Isser not just to musical instruments, but even clapping or banging on your legs or banging on the table. If it's done derech simcha v'shir, all such things are osir. So that's what we see so far. Now, continues the Mechaber, aval lahakish al hadelets. But you go to visit somebody on Shabbos and you want to knock on the door. Now, when you go bang on the door, you're being mashmiya koil. It's not vastly different than clapping. When you're clapping, you're being mashmiya koil with your hands. When you go to knock on the door, you're being mashmiya koil with your fist and you're banging on the door. Is that also? Says the Mechaber, no. Again, just like the Mishnah Berurah said, you could clap if you're not doing it derech simcha v'shir. You could clap if really you should be allowed to clap to scare away the birds. You're not allowed to do it because you might come to throw a stone. So different reason. But as far as the hashmas koil shaboy, it would be mutter, because the only time it's aser is if it's derech simcha v'shir, and that's not derech simcha v'shir. So to go knock on the door with your fist is not derech simcha v'shir. It's just bang bang, hello, I'm here. That's mutter. Hashmas koil. If it's not a musical instrument, if you're doing it with your hands, and it's not derech simcha v'shir, it's mutter. So that's what the Mechaber said here. Mutter, that is mutter. Says the Mishnah Berurah cotton base. Even though you certainly have intent to make noise so that they should open the door for you, mutter, it's still mutter. You can even do this with a keli. Now, you cannot do it with a kli amayuchad lekach. You're not allowed to use a door knocker. You know those brass rings that hang on the door? You're not allowed to use a door knocker on Shabbos, because then you're using a kli amayuchad lekach. We'll get to that in the Ramah. But the Mechaber says you want to take a keli if there's a hammer, which is a kli shemalach l'isser and is muktzah, but you want to use it tzarich gufay. You want to use it to bang on the door so they should let you in. It would be mutter. Why? Because it's not derech simcha v'shir. Since it's not derech simcha v'shir, it would be mutter. Okay. Now we go to the Ramah, very interesting Ramah that's going to take us through the rest of today's shir. Hago. Says the Mishnah Berurah, another very important thing. V'chein im loy avid maisa shari. You're also allowed to be mashmiya koil if you're not doing something active with your hands. To go be mashmiya koil, you're allowed to be mashmiya koil. What does this mean? The Ramah gives an example. V'lachein, elu shekayrin lechavereim, people who want to get their friends' attention. They're calling out to their friends to get their attention. Umitzaftzifim b'piem k'moy tzipor. So they whistle. You want to whistle on Shabbos? Mutar la'asayse b'Shabbos. You're allowed to whistle on Shabbos. You're making noise with your mouth. You're making noise with your mouth. There's no problem in doing that. You're not doing a maisa to be mashmiya koil. You're blowing through your mouth. It's interesting. Aruch HaShulchan points out, he says, obviously we don't have a havamina that you're not allowed to be mashmiya koil in any way with your mouth. You're allowed to talk on Shabbos. You're allowed to yell on Shabbos. You're allowed to sing on Shabbos. That's certainly derech shira simcha v'shir. You're allowed to sing on Shabbos. So why do I need the Ramah to tell me that you're allowed to whistle on Shabbos? Says the Aruch HaShulchan, a chiddush over here is, those people who whistle, they put their fingers in their mouth, and that makes them be able to whistle a very, very loud whistle. I can't do it, but they can. I don't know how they do it. Says the Aruch HaShulchan, you're allowed to do that too, because that somehow, you're still making the noise with your mouth. You're allowed to do that on Shabbos. That's not a problem. So that's what the Ramah means here. You're not doing anything with your hand or with your body. You're just using your mouth. That's mutter. You whistle like a bird. Mutter la'asayse b'Shabbos. You're allowed to do this on Shabbos. And the Mishnah Berurah has a very interesting addition to this. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Gimel. Elu shekar lechavereihem. Hainu afilu imanim hakoil ke'ein shir shari. You're allowed to whistle a tune. I would show you, but I don't know how. So you could whistle a tune on Shabbos. So mamish, people are singing Zmiris by the Shabbos table, and you want to do musical accompaniment by whistling along to the tune, You're allowed to do that. There's no issur there of being mashmiya koil. The loy gozru bazeh hechid ovid bepeh. Because as long as you're doing it with your mouth, there is no gezerah over here. Could be that when you're using something extrinsic, there could be room for gezerah shebi yisaki klishir. When you're using the mouth, there's no gezerah shebi yisaki klishir. Okay, now we come to the more complicated part of today's share, and that is the next halacha of the Ramah. So we have to follow kind of the paper trail. The Mechaber started off, you're not allowed to use musical instrument. Mishnah Berurah extended it. It's not only an issur about musical instruments, you're not even allowed to clap if it's derech simcha v'shir. Said the Mechaber, look, to bang on the door, that's not derech simcha v'shir, and you're not using a musical instrument, that's perfectly mutter, no problem. The Mishnah Berurah in Ois Cotton Bays said you could even knock on the door with a keli. You could even take a hammer and knock on the door. It's not a problem. It's not derech simcha v'shir, it's just making noise. That's fine. And you're not using a musical instrument. You're using a keli, but not a musical instrument. That's all so far, that's okay. Says the Ramah. But v'aser lahakois b'Shabbos aladeles, you're not allowed to knock on the door on Shabbos, b'tabas hakavua badeles, using the ring that's attached to the door knocker. That you're not allowed to use on Shabbos. Af al pi she'enoi mechaven l'shir, even though this is not derech simcha v'shir, it's no different than you knocking on the door with your fist. When you knock on the door with your fist, the reason it's mutter is because it's not derech simcha v'shir. When you use the door knocker, it's also not derech simcha v'shir. Yet the Ramah says that's aser. Why? Hayil v'hakli miyuchad lekach. Since now you're using a keli, but you're not using a hammer. You're using a keli miyuchad lekach. You're using a keli that is miyuchad for hashmas koil. You're using a keli that's miyuchad for making noise. Aser, that is aser. Okay, let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cotton dalid miyuchad lekach. You're using a keli that's miyuchad lekach. What does the Ramah mean when he calls the door knocker a keli miyuchad lekach? Says the Mishnah Berurah Tzayna Loimar, what the Ramah means is shemiyuchad lahashmiya koil. The bottom line is that brass door knocker is a keli that is miyuchad, not for shir. It's not a musical instrument, but it is miyuchad for hashmas koil. It's a keli that is intended for making noise. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what the Ramah is telling you is, once you're using a keli that is miyuchad for hashmas koil, now, says the Mishnah Berurah Chayshinon, we must be concerned shema yechavein l'shir. What the Mishnah Berurah seems to be saying over here is that once you're using a keli that is miyuchad for making noise, once you're using a door knocker, which is a keli that's, what is its point? It's there to create sound. That's what it's there for. Now, it's not a musical instrument. It's not intended for creating musical sound. It's not intended for derech simcha v'shir, but it is intended to make noise. Says the Ramah, at least this is the way I'm understanding the Mishnah Berurah on the Ramah, it is a very small step. It's a very small step. Once you have a keli that's made for making noise, so now you could use it for derech simcha v'shir. Now you might be tempted to beat out a rhythm, right? Instead of just going bang, bang, you might go and make a little ditty. Bump, 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 bump. Right? You'll just take the door knocker and you'll bang it out in a rhythm. You'll bang it out in a beat. Because the bottom line is, it is a keli that's miyuchad for hashmas koil. And therefore, since it's such a small step, we're willing to extend the gzera. The same way there's a gzera on a musical instrument, gzera yishami yisaki klishir, there's going to be a gzera on this too, because it is miyuchad for hashmas koil. It's not miyuchad for musical hashmas koil, but it's miyuchad for hashmas koil. Once it's miyuchad for hashmas koil, maybe you'll use it for derech simcha v'shir. Maybe you'll use it for musical hashmas koil. Therefore, it falls under the rubric of things that are aser, because gzeri shemi yisaki klishir. this might be what the Levush means also. The Levush writes over here that we're afraid you're going to come to fix the door knocker. So some people look at it and say what the Levush means is nothing to do so much with the Gzeir Shem Yisaki Klishir. No, it's just you're using a keli, you might come to fix it if it breaks. Well, we don't make that Gzeir on most kelim. On most kelim, we don't make a Gzeir that you can't use them because you might come to repair them on Shabbos. We find that Gzeira by Klei Shir. I think what the Levush might mean is that it's, since once, like the Mishnah Berurah says, it is meyuchad lashmiya koil, so then there's a very small difference. A shofar is meyuchad lashmiya koil, right? I know people who play music on a shofar. I'm about to care, Rabbi say. I cannot play Yankee Doodle Dandy on a shofar. I could blow a great Tkiya Shvarim through a Tkiya. I could even blow a whole slew of different Shvarims. You want the Tehutus and the Tutus and this and that. I could blow all sorts of different Shvarims. I can't play a musical ditty on a shofar, but I know people who can. I know people who can play all sorts of music on the shofar. So a shofar is, you're going to call a shofar that it's miyuchad for derech shira v'simcha v'shir? No, it's not. It's not a musical instrument. But once you have a keli that is miyuchad for hashmas koil, it very easily could be turned into a primitive musical instrument. And therefore, says the Ramah, once you have a keli a miyuchad lekach, you're not allowed to use it on Shabbos, even if you're just using it to bang and make non-musical sound. Okay. So again, the Mishnah Berurah said, the Choshke certainly says the Mishnah Berurah, Lashmiya koil bekli shekayrin kamerton, to use a tuning fork. That's what this is. For those of you who don't know what a tuning fork is, it's a prong, and then it has a U-shaped two prongs coming off it. They make them to different octaves and pitches. So I have somewhere a C major. You take it, you bang it, and it rings with that note. So you can have tuning forks for all different notes. It's a tool that musicians use to get onto the right key. If they know that they want to sing something to a C major, so they'll take a C major tuning fork, go ding, and they'll listen to it, and that puts them onto the right key. So says the Mishnah Berurah, you're definitely not allowed to use a tuning fork. Pshita daser, the klishiru, it's a mamash musical instrument. The gamu mechaven lishir, and when you bang it, you're intending on making a musical sound. There's a very important reason, by the way, why the Chavetz Chaim felt he had to write this. And it's because there were a lot of chazanim, unfortunately, back in the day, who had a tuning fork in their pocket. And on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, on Yom Kippur, they would take the tuning fork to get the right key and then start shochenad, but they wanted to know that they had the right key. So, and it was something that Amaratzis Tika Chazanim didn't even know that it was Aser. You had certain Chazanim that were not Amaratzim, they were Mechali Shabbos. But it was very important to them to do a good job because that was their paycheck. So they would try to do it on the sly. I know, my grandfather was a Chazan. He would tell me about the Chazanim who would have it in their pocket and they would just go to the bima, between them and the bima and give a tap and listen, put their ear down so they could hear it. But those were Chazanim that were Mechali Shabbos, unfortunately. Continues the Mishnah Berurah, over Barzal Shah Pesach Ninal v'Niftach Boy. Okay, so you can't use the door knocker. But we learned earlier when we were learning Hilchas Muktzah, where we were learning the halachas of Baina and Soiser, we learned about a door that has a bolt that's hanging from it. So you had a string and you had a bolt, and this was the bolt that when you wanted to lock the door, you took it and you inserted it, right? So what if you want to go knock on somebody's door, and you want to be able to make a nice loud knock, and they have an iron bolt hanging from the door. So you want to take the iron bolt and you want to bang on the door. That, the Mishnah Berurah says, is okay. It would be mutter to use that to bang on the door, so that people will hear and open the door. Because that's not a keli that's miyuchad lashmas koil. That's a keli that's miyuchad for locking the door. That's not miyuchad for hashmas koil. So that would be mutter. Ice cut and hay. So the Ramah said to use the door knocker is aser. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah. Ayin be'el Yerabah pri begadim. Take a look at the El Yerabah and the pri begadim. To Bizen Nishma, who say that we could learn from here. Tehu adin da aser limshoich bechut ha'invol b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to pull the string of the bell. An invol is a bell. a basic good old-fashioned bell, a metal dome with a clapper inside. You have a string on the clapper. You're not allowed to go and pull the string to ring the bell. This was the doorbell. You're not allowed to ring the doorbell on Shabbos, says the Chavetz Chaim. Why? Pashut. This is a keli that is b'yuchad for Hashmas Koil. It's like the door knocker. It's even worse than the door knocker. It makes a musical sound. So you're not allowed to use it. Vayin bir halacha, but take a look at the bir halacha. The bir halacha, he's mekel b'shas chak. It's late at night and you can't get into the house and you're stuck outside and maybe it's freezing and you have to get in. So he's mekel that you could use that doorbell, not electronic doorbells, Rabbi say, but this thing, this bell where you shake the string and it makes ding, ding, ding. You're allowed to use that on Shabbos. Again, it's not really a musical instrument. You're not trying to make music. You're just trying to make noise so that they should let you in. The reason it's asur is because of the Ramah. It's a keli amiyuchad lekach, but we could be mekel b'shas chak. Now, as far as another shaila, you have a door and it has a bell affixed to it. So when you open the door or close the door, you're going to make the bell ring by virtue of moving the door. Is that mutter or aser? That is going to be in the next Mishnah Berurah. Okay, before we go to the next Mishnah Berurah, let's go a little bit weiter in the Mechaber. Says in the Ramah, Says the Ramah in the middle of the bottom line, V'lochein. Based on this Isser, the Ramah just told you, you're not allowed to use the door knocker. Now again, why aren't you allowed to use the door knocker? Because it is a kli that is miyuchad for hashmas koil. You're not allowed to use a kli hamiyuchad lahashmas koil, even if you're using it to make noise, not kederech simcha v'shir. Even though you're using it just to make noise, you're still not allowed to use it because it's miyuchad lahashmas koil. Based on that, says the Ramah v'lachet. Also l'shamish lahakois aladelas likroi lebeis hakneses. The shamish who used to go around the town and bang on the doors, kom lavoy de saboire, he would go around to wake up the townsfolk to come to shul. V'lachein, also l'shamish lahakis aladelis likroi lebeis hakneses, he's not allowed to go bang on the door to wake people up to come to shul. Al yedei hakli hamiyuchad lekach. He can't use a keli. This doesn't even have to be a door knocker that's attached to the door. It could be that there's a particular keli. There is a portable door knocker. He has the shamish. Maybe it's the symbol of his authority. To give him a door knocker. So he has a door knocker. He goes around town banging on the doors. It's a kli hamiyuchad lashmas koil. He's not allowed to use it on Shabbos. He can't do it. Yedei kli hamiyuchad lekach. Ella, what should he do? Makah biyodei aladelas. He has to bang with his hand. Why? Because he can't use the keli hamiyuchad lekach. Okay. Against that backdrop, we have a very interesting Mishnah Berurah here. Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Vav. V'lachein asa l'shamish. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Kosav HaTaz kan, the Taz writes over here, ubi Yeridei Siman Reish Pei Beis, and also in Yeridei Siman Reish Pei Beis, to bizeh muchach, that from this halach of the Ramah, it is proven, the asur litlois b'Shabbos oisan haparoichos, sheyesh bem pa'amoinim, you can't use a paroiches on Shabbos that has bells hanging on it, la shmiya koil, so that the paroiches should make noise, kishapoischin ha'aron, when they open up the aron. You open up the aron, you want everybody to stand up. So very cute. You have a paroiches that has bells attached to it. When somebody has psicha, he opens up the paroiches, it makes noise, and now everybody knows that they have to stand up. Says the Taz, you're not allowed to use such a paroiches on Shabbos. V'chein, similarly, litlois ha'pa'amoinim ala atzechayim shel Sefer Torah. You can't put bells on the atzechayim of the Sefer Torah. Why would you want to do that? Simple. So that when somebody's carrying the Sefer Torah, it makes noise, everybody stands up. You can't put bells on the Sefer Torah. Why? Kevin de ikar avidit telekola. Because what is that? Those bells are kelim that are miyuchad for hashmas koil. And the Ramah just said, you're not allowed to use a keli that's miyuchad lashmas koil, even if you have no intent on making music. You don't have any intent here to make music. You just want to make noise so people know to stand up. You're not looking to make music, but it doesn't matter. These bells are keli amiyuchad lashmas koil, so you're not allowed to use them. So no bells on the paroiches, no bell on the Sifrei Torah. So says the Taz. V'ashach sham chelek alav, the Shach seems to disagree. It's very interesting. If you look at the Shach doesn't say this straight out. It's more that the Magen Avraham makes a diuk in the Shach. V'ashach sham chelek alav, mitam da kaimelon de l'tzarech mitzvah shari. From the Shach it comes out that l'tzarech mitzvah, you're allowed to use a keli. That's miyuchad for hashmas koil, if all you're doing is making noise. And l'chayra, over here it's derech mitzvah. K'moshe kasa siman shin lamites, the mutal l'raked b'simchas Torah, l'chvayt HaTorah, v'chinami tzarech mitzvah, kadei sheyishmu v'yikumu. We're going to learn in shin lamites that on simchas Torah you're allowed to dance. Now normally on Shabbos you're not allowed to dance. You know why? Same gzera that we're dealing with here. Gzera shem yasakin klei shir. On simchas Torah they say you're allowed to clap. Why? Because, again, since it's a tzarech mitzvah, we waive the gzera d'Rabbanan of gzera shem yasakin klei shir. So, says the Shach, or the Magen Avraham really, to put bells on the Yatzei Chaim of the Sefer Torah, to put bells on the Paroiches, so people should stand up l'chvayt HaTorah, it's tzarech mitzvah. So why is the Taz saying it's asur? L'chayr it should be mutter. Now, you might ask me, from the Ramah that we just learned. We just learned the Ramah that says that the shamish is not allowed to bang on people's doors to wake them up, kum la'avodas haboirei, using a keli amiyuchad lekach. Why not? That's also tzarech mitzvah. Says the Magen Avraham, no, it's not a valid comparison. V'lo yidami l'kriyas beis hakneses to asur. You can't compare this to the shamish waking people up to come to shul. The hasam efshir be'inyan acher. Because over there, what does the Ramah say? He says, don't use the keli amiyuchad lekach, because you could just as easily knock on the door with your fist. So yeah, we would be willing to be matir at l'tzarech mitzvah, but we're not going to be matir at l'tzarech mitzvah if you could do it just as easily without us being matir it. So don't use the keli amiyuchad lekach. Use your fist. Visu, furthermore, says the Magen Avraham, the person who's opening the paroiches, ein mechaven lahashmi'a kol klal. It's very nice that the embroiderer put bells on the bottom of the paroiches, but the person who's opening the paroiches has absolutely no kavanah for hashmas koil. He just wants to open up Aron HaKodesh to take out the Sefer Torah. He has no kavanah for hashmas koil at all. So says the Magen Avraham, you're dealing with an Issa D'Rabbanan, Gzera Shem Yasakin Klei Shir. You're not dealing with Klei Shir. Yeah, you're dealing with a kli that's miyuchid for hashmas koil, but you're not making pleasant noise, you're really making annoying noise. Right? But you want to answer it because it's a kli miyuchid lashmas koil. It's also tzarech mitzvah. And also the one who's opening the paroiches has zero kavanah for this. So the Magen Avraham is very unhappy with this. His kavanah, the one opening the paroiches, is kiyum lital and sefer Torah. Vayin b'shar Ephraim, shar Yud Sif Gimel, shadait asham de lechatchila in lasis kem b'Shabbos. The Shar Ephraim takes the position that lechatchila, we should worry about this taz, and we should not do this lechatchila. But people that are noig heter, you shouldn't object to them. Ad kan l'shaynai. By the way, just interesting fact. A lot of you might be thinking right now about the ksarim, the beautiful silver crowns that they put on the Sifrei Torah on Shabbos that have little bells on them. Take a close look at those bells. You know what you'll find? They have no clappers. That's right. 99.9% of the bells that they put on the ksarim do not have clappers for this reason. That's why they don't have clappers. They don't have clappers so that we should be machmer like the Taz. That they're not really mashmi'a koil. They're decorative. They might jingle a little bit, but you can't call it a kli amiyuchad lashmas koil. It's not a bell. It's not a functional bell. It has no clapper. Now, let's go back to the shaila that the Mishnah Berurah mentioned in the previous Ois Cotton. And that is the door that has a bell attached to it. So l'chayr it's the same as the paroiches, right? You have a paroiches with little bells on it. When you open the paroiches, the bells are going to ring. You're using a keli amiyuchad lashmas koil. So you have a door, it has a bell on it. L'chayr, same issue. You open the door, you're going to ring the bell. The bell is a keli amiyuchad lashmas koil. Is this a problem? Says the Mishnah Berurah, indeed, Tali Gam Ken Bisfaras Hataz V'Magen Avram Anal. It would be Tali on this Bachlaikis to Magen Avram and the Taz. The Lahataz Aser, Ula Magen Avram, according to the Magen Avram, Kan over here, V'chem B'Sibit Alf Sivkat Lamadei Ayin Sham, Shari, according to the Magen Avram, it would be Mutter. The Harei Kishapesech Adelos B'Shabbos Eid Mechavan Lashmi HaKoil. There's zero kavana for making noise when you open the door. The Gra seems to hold like the Taz. The Kevon the Invol Miyuchad Lashmiya Koil. Since the bottom line is that this bell is a Keli Amiyuchad Lashmas Koil, ain't nafkimina b'mashu ain't mechavan lozeh. The Gra seems to reason, what do I care if the person has kavano or not? Bottom line is he's making use of a Keli that's Miyuchad Lashmas Koil, which the Rama says you're not allowed to do. V'gam el Yerabah mitzad dein lahakal mitam zelachud elagabi paroiches do milsa the mitzvah. The El Yerabah says we could be makel by the paroiches because it's a mitzvah. V'alkein bevadei me'anochin sheyosem me'erev Shabbos invol me'algabi ha'pesach oishiyip gekenu b'tzemer b'muchin shel yishma koiloi. He says, the Mishnah Berurah, that lechatchila, if you have a door that has a bell on it, and the bell is going to ring when you open the door, you should stuff the bell up before Shabbos, or take the bell off. Ach, b'makam atchak, kigon sheshachach v'lo yisiram, you have a Shabbos, chaki agavna, nir diyachal lismach al asfara. Now, lahakal kevchein mechaved lashmiya koil. Okay, we're going to do one more Mishnah Berurah here. Mishnah Berurah is cutting Zion, just to finish off the Sif. So the Ramah said that the Shamish is not allowed to go around with his door knocker to bang on the doors on Shabbos, because he's using a Keli Amayuchad Lashmas Koil. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'yesh b'kaimais, there are places, Shalokech HaShamish b'Shabbos, Kliyach halakis b'Shabbos. He doesn't go around with the door knocker. He takes a Kliyacher. What's a Kliyacher? Maybe he takes a hammer. He takes a hammer, and he bangs on the doors with a hammer, because the hammer is not a Keli Amayuchad Lashmas Koil. And it's not a Keli that's Meyuchad Lashmas Koil, even if he uses it every Shabbos. It's still not a Keli Amayuchad Lashmas Koil. It's a Keli that's Meyuchad to knock in nails. Umashe Kosav HaShamish Bebeis HaKnesses, Umashe Makeh HaShamish Bebeis HaKnesses Al HaShulchan. When the Gabbai wants to go bang on the bima in middle of davening, Umashmiya Koil, to make noise, Kedei Lahashkit Ha'am, to shush everybody, L'chazaras HaShleach Tzibur, people are unfortunately making noise during Chazaras HaShatz, so the Gabbai wants to go bang on the bima. Even if he picks up something to bang on the bima, it's not an isser, because he's not using a keli hamayuchad lashmas koil. I was in one shul where the gabe had a keli hamayuchad lashmas koil. There was an official on the bima. There was a very impressive looking wooden construct with a big, it kind of looked almost like a judge's gavel, but a big impressive looking hammer. And it was clearly Kli HaMiyuchad Lashmas Koil. I mean, that's what it was there for. So that would be an interesting shayla. You wouldn't be allowed to use that. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discuss of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe Shalom should send Yeshua, Refuas, Parnas, and Shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the Bias Gal Tzedek. B'mher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.